Good afternoon, church. I hope that you are doing well. I'm excited to be able to study this class with you. This is our second week in our Crucible series, in which we examine powerful transformations in the Bible. Transformation is an interesting thing, because transformation is always in the present tense. No matter how long you've been a Christian, how mature you are in your faith, transformation is an ever-going process. You are not who you were yesterday, and you shouldn't be tomorrow who you are today. For those of us who have experienced Christ, we find that His ever-presence in our life should constantly be changing and transforming and molding us. However, I would like to say that this is not always an easy process, and always and often we fight it. See, there's this perceived rightness that comes to mature Christians, in which we believe we know enough. We truly have experienced Jesus enough. We've studied hard enough. We've developed enough knowledge that we certainly don't need anything else. And as soon as that happens, transformation stops, and we as a Christian begin to backslide. This series is designed to challenge that, to constantly be pushing us to transform, to become something better. Last week we studied this in the life of Peter, in between two charcoal fires. The Jesus that Peter expected was not the Jesus that he actually was. The expectations of Peter was a messianic king, a violent ruler, one of this world, who loved king and country, who fought by the paradigms of humanity. And the Jesus that actually was a self-sacrificial servant, who preached other love, peace at all costs, and death rather than killing. The expectation of Jesus in Peter's mind wasn't the beauty of who Jesus was. And at first that caused Peter fear, anxiety, confusion, and denial. But ultimately we see on the second charcoal fire that who Jesus actually was so beautiful that it compelled a transformation in Peter. Likewise, I challenged you last week to bring into the charcoal fire your expectations of Christ. Leave them there and discover who He actually is, how beautiful He actually is. Don't ever think you've arrived at who Jesus is, because just at the time you think you've arrived there, you'll find He's more beautiful than ever imagined. Allow the transformation to constantly flow over you and through you. Today we're going to be taking another story from the New Testament, John chapter 20. If you have your Bible, go ahead and start turning there, in which we're going to examine Thomas, or Didymus, and the way he was transformed by holding the hands of Christ. Now, before we jump into this, I want to make a couple of notes clear. I hate when people say doubting Thomas. I don't like it. All of the New Testament Christians doubted Jesus' resurrection. All of them were shocked and amazed and surprised when He rose on the third day. And all of them had to see to believe. Remember in John, we have one of my favorite stories. It's the only brag I can find in the New Testament, where as soon as Peter and John heard that Jesus was no longer in the tomb, they didn't settle to just begin to worship. They didn't settle. They had to see it and believe it for themselves. And so they raced to the tomb, and John says that he ran faster than Peter. But Peter went into the tomb. Why? Because they had to know themselves. All of the apostles needed a tangible Jesus experience to be able to know that He resurrected from the dead. Thomas just had the misfortune of not being there and not being able to have one himself. What we have in Thomas is not a weaker Christian. We just have an explicit story that all of them had, where he needed to see Jesus, experience Jesus, to practically and existentially know that He was who He claimed He was, and that He had resurrected from the dead. So, John chapter 20, let's read the story together, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Verse 24. One of the 12, Thomas, also known as Didymus, wasn't with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples spoke to Him. "We've seen the Master," they yelled. "Unless I see the mark of the nails in His hands," replied Thomas, "and put my finger into the nail marks, and put my hand into His side, I'm not going to believe." A week later, the disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. The doors were shut, but Jesus came and stood in the middle of them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he addressed Thomas. "Bring your finger here and inspect my hands. Bring your hand and put it into my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Just believe." "My Lord," replied Thomas, "and my God." This story is profound to me in so many ways. And I think chiefly it's because I can relate to Thomas. I long for Jesus' experiences. I listen to a lot of theologians. I read a tremendous amount of theologians, and all of them often reflect on the moments in their life where they experienced Jesus, like Thomas did here. Moments where they felt like they had in their hands the hands of God. They felt like they were in the presence. They knew they were in the presence of God. It's amazing that these Jesus experiences can often light a fire in our heart. In fact, many of us were converted because of these Jesus moments. And I don't know about you, but I spend so much of my Christian walk longing for and searching for and pursuing those Jesus moments where I experience Him in a very real way. But far too often I find myself like Thomas. See, what's interesting about Thomas is that though in verse 25 we see that he doubted, he struggled to know in reality Jesus' resurrection. Look at what happened in verse 26. He was living outwardly as if inwardly he had experienced Christ. Let me say that again. He was living outwardly as if he had inwardly experienced Christ. He was going through the motions as if Jesus had resurrected, despite the fact that the resurrection was not a reality to him yet. He was in the upper room, he was with the apostles, he was fellowshipping with them, but he didn't have a reality of Jesus yet. I want to gently offer that I have met many Thomases in my Christian walk. In fact, frequently I am a Thomas in my Christian walk. I outwardly and practically go through the motions as if I know and am convicted that Jesus is a reality. But often inwardly, I don't feel Him or experience Him. And it's a struggle to outwardly go through the motions, come to church, take the Lord's Supper, sing the songs, even preach or pray or lead a Bible class, when deep down I long for a Jesus moment that I haven't had in forever. I outwardly and practically talk about a Jesus that though in my mind I know is real, sometimes in my heart He doesn't feel real. And I find myself coming back to the story in John 20, begging for me to hold the hands of Christ in mine, to feel His nail scars, to put my hand in His side. I practically and outwardly live as if I have Jesus' reality, when in my heart I feel so distant from Him. I haven't experienced Him, and I often don't feel Him here. So what a lot of Christians do in response to this is they begin to distance themselves from Him. They begin to say things like, well, feelings are untrustworthy, or I don't need Jesus moments. And they begin to turn to things like Bible study. They begin to turn to things like ritual in order to try to cultivate some security, even though they don't have the experiential trust in God. And although none of those things are necessarily wrong intrinsically, they become wrong when we're finding ourselves sitting in upper rooms and fellowshipping with the apostles despite the fact that in our heart we haven't experienced Jesus. Or it's been forever since we have. Today I would like us to consider how we can undergo a Thomas transformation. How we can go from outwardly living as if we're experiencing Jesus to actually experiencing Jesus moment by moment, day by day, week by week. How we can go from outwardly showing the rituals of Christianity and inwardly actually feeling His hands in ours, touching His nail scars and putting our hands in His side. How can we transform ourselves? Well, I'd like to ask 3 questions, and then we'll explain what this week's going to look like. First, why do we need to have Jesus moments? Why do we need to have Jesus experiences daily? Because notice what happened with Thomas. Thomas used two phrases, my Lord and my God. Now, my Lord is a pretty common phrase in the New Testament. In fact, many people offer it. However, in this moment, Thomas declares that he is God, something that hitherto had not yet happened. My God. Notice the personal nature of Thomas attributing deity to his Jesus. My God. See, he wouldn't have had that experience had Jesus not made himself known to him, had he not held the hands of Christ. We need, and listen to this carefully, we need Jesus experiences for Jesus as God to be real in our hearts. We need Jesus moments weekly, daily, sometimes moment by moment, in order for us to express the reality of Jesus in our hearts. We need Jesus moments for us to feel convicted and close to and personal to God. I have a wife, and if all I ever did about my wife was study her journals and know about her, if I followed the rituals of being a husband, despite the fact that I didn't know my wife, I didn't hold her hands in mine, I didn't feel her lips on mine, I didn't hug her and embrace her in my arms, then that's not really having something. It's not having a relationship. Likewise, in order for us to have a relationship with Jesus, we need to experience him. We need to have these Jesus moments. The second question, or what are Jesus moments? Well, that's different person to person. This week I want us to explore two questions, these last two questions. What are Jesus moments, and how do we experience Jesus? With this video, I have sent you a worksheet, a journal log. I invite you every day to answer the prompts given. Every day on YouTube, I'll have a 50-second demonstration of just reminding you kind of what this is, of what the journal entry looks like or what I'm expecting. And throughout this week, we're going to undergo a transformation together as we try to experience Jesus more and more. I hope that at the end of this week, next week, when we come together on Zoom, that you have begun a Thomas transformation, going from outwardly expressing Jesus and inwardly experiencing him. Okay, I hope that you stay with us, and I will see you tomorrow in our video. Bye.